Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining us. My name is Ed Schuler with Personal Wealth Strategies. I am a chartered financial consultant and an accredited investment fiduciary, and I'd like to thank you for joining our Women's Financial Empowerment webinar series number 2. And tonight it's on consumer debt. Our first series was on budgeting. So I have a whole litany of topics we're going to be talking about. But before I get going, what I'd like to do is I have to give a disclosure to let you know that this webinar is being recorded, and I must have your consent to continue. If you do not consent on being recorded, I do have to ask you to exit the webinar. All right, so with that being said, let's get going with this. All right, my goal is pretty much to inform you about consumer debt, credit scores, and different methods of paying down debt. Okay, so if I could get you to take one or two takeaways from this meeting, it was a success. So what I want to do is I want to start talking about 2 months into last year, 2020, the U.S. economy plunged into a recession. Overall, total consumer debt grew to just under $14.9 trillion. Several types of debt contributed to this growth, but credit card debt counteracted due to a decrease in credit card balances. So due to COVID-19, the pandemic, it caused a record of unemployment. There was a widespread of economic anxiety, and people were overall concerned. We were faced with uncertainty. U.S. consumers continued to borrow in 2020, and consumer debt balance actually grew $800 billion to a record high. Now, since 2019, mortgage loans, auto loans, student loans, and personal loans reach all-time record highs. Student loans saw an increase of 12%, followed by mortgages, they increased by 7%. Personal loans increased by about 7%. And this is all according to research done by Experian. Credit card debt actually decreased for the first time in 8 years, dropping by $73 million or 9%. And home equity line of credit also continued their decline, as did retail credit cards. Go figure, right? But with the pandemic and so many Americans out of work, Congress passed the Coronavirus AIDS Relief and Economic Securities Act, also known as the CARES Act, and that gave everyone a one-time payment of $1,200. They expanded unemployment benefits and suspended student loan payments. Now, as consumers, we are faced with different spending and saving patterns than ever before. With stay-at-home orders and shutdowns, restricted activities on shopping, travel, and in-restaurant dining for a period of time, we were really in uncharted waters. Now, some interesting facts. Changes in average debt by generation. If you take a look at the Gen Z, the age 18 to 23, their actual debt went up 67%. The millennials, age 24 to 39, their debt increased 11.5%. And the Gen X's, age 40 to 55, increased 3.5%. The baby boomer generation, which is my generation, increased by 3%. And the silent generation, my parents, actually decreased 4.6%. So a couple things I want you to understand, so credit and credit measures. I'm sure you heard of FICO. FICO is a model that measures credit scores and gives us our credit scores. So a couple things, how do we pay off debt? How does debt affect us? And debt can be like super overwhelming. It could be stressful and frustrating. When it gets out of control, can have a huge effect on our emotional and our physical health. The way to tackle debt is take one step at a time. Develop a plan and stay true to the plan that you develop. Sometimes that plan needs to be flexible and you may have to pivot or change things in the middle. But if your goal is to pay off the debt, then let's get down to it and pay off the debt. So let's talk about how debt affects your credit score. All right. So there are two types of debt. There is a revolving debt and an installment debt. All right. Now, revolving debt comes from credit cards. This is debt you tend to carry will revolve a balance from month to month. You borrow as much as you would like up to a credit limit, and interest rates sometimes are subject to change. And monthly payments may vary depending on how much you owe. Now, on the other hand, installment debt is a little bit different. It's your mortgage, it's your auto loans, it's your student loans, your personal loans. And in most cases, the amount you borrow, the interest rate you pay, and the term of the loan determines the monthly payment, which are usually fixed. Some are variable. You may have a variable interest rate, and that may change. But in most situations, it's fixed. If you miss a payment or are late, the lender can report to the credit bureau. And this can stay on your credit report for about 7 years. And you may have to pay late payments or late fees as well. These two types of debt affect your credit scores differently. Installment debt, not so much. It's not really that big of an impact on your credit score. But the revolving debt does. So high balances compared to credit card limits will have negative impact on your credit score. So let me explain. And I just learned this recently. Go figure, right? So I wanted to buy a used truck, pickup truck. I did some research. I found a credit union that gave very good interest rates on used vehicles, and I applied for a loan. When I applied for a loan, it was right in between Christmas and New Year's. Now, what happens before Christmas? You buy a lot of gifts and you tend to drive up your credit on your credit card. Okay? So I applied and I sent this application in and I got approved. And with that being said, I looked for a truck in January, February, March, and April. I finally found a vehicle and I purchased it. And I called the credit union up because they gave me one interest rate. And then on the time of purchase, my interest rate went up by 1/4 of a point. So I called them up inquiring why it went up 1/4 of a point. And they said, well, because your credit score dropped below 800 points. Now, I'm usually at about 820, 850, depending on the month, obviously. But with all the debt that I incurred for the holidays before I paid it off, I applied, and that affected my credit rating, which dropped it below 800. I think it was around 780. So with that being said, not knowing that there's something called a credit utilization ratio, I'm going to get into that into a second, that affected my credit score. So it affected because the percentage of available credit I was using called my credit utilization, and my credit utilization ratio was higher than 30%. So the credit utilization ratio is your credit card balance compared to your credit card limit. And if it's over 30%, it affects your credit. So for example, if I have a $10,000 limit on all my credit cards, and if I'm at $3,001 over that limit, I'm over 30%, that may affect my credit score. So they look at this. They look at your overall credit limits that you have and your outstanding credit that you have on revolving credit, obviously, and that may affect your credit score, as it did mine. After paying my credit cards off, it dropped it. It increased my credit score again. Okay, it dropped the percentage ratio and increased the credit score. Okay, so high credit card debt can hurt your credit scores. Quickly paying off your debt, let's say on a monthly basis, is good for your credit scores and will increase your credit scores. Any missed payments will hurt your credit score, obviously. Opening new accounts on an ongoing basis actually hurts your credit score as well, too. Because one of the things that the companies look at is they look at the age of credit. So if you're opening new credit cards and it reduces your age of credit, that also can reduce your credit score. So they want to see longevity within your credit. So I'd like to go over a few myths regarding credit scoring. You must carry a credit card balance to boost your credit score. That is false. Carrying high credit card balances are good. That is also false. Paying off your balance in full every month is good. That is true. And then having different types of credit card accounts and loans help increase your credit score. That is also true. Just make sure you're able to manage all these different credit cards. But one thing you really have to understand is credit card can be dangerous. Some of the things these companies do, I tend to question. So they'll offer you introductory low rates, and these rates eventually will expire into higher rates. They also may offer you high credit card limits that you may not want. Again, rates are typically high, so you do have the availability to work the rates and try to get the rates down, and also understand the benefits. And you also have to understand, you could have a huge credit limit and max out your credit cards and say, oh, well, I have this really low monthly payment. I can handle that monthly payment. But what you have to understand is these minimum monthly payments are so low that it can take you decades to pay this loan off, this credit card off. The interest you pay can also be higher than the amount you borrowed. So for example, let's say you borrow $8,000 and let's say the interest rate on the credit card is 17% and you never use that credit card again. It can take about 16 years to pay off that loan, and it can cost you $7,000 in interest. So with that being said, you really need to understand your credit cards, the revolving credit, and you also need to understand and read the fine print. Most of us don't. So let's talk about different ways of paying off debt now. So if you only have one debt, your strategy is pretty simple. It's to make the biggest monthly payment you can handle. Repeat that process until your debt is gone. Pretty simple. But if you're like most of us, you may have multiple accounts. For example, American Express Business, Visa, Target, Macy's, Lowe's, Home Depot. I mean, the list goes on. I can show you stacks of credit cards that my family has acquired throughout the years. So with all these multiple accounts, sometimes it can be a little bit difficult to manage, and you really need to find a debt elimination method that really works for you. And like I said, stay true to the method, make sure it's flexible, and make sure you can stay within the range of the method that's best for you. So the first myth that I'm going to talk about is I'm going to talk about the highest interest rate method, but it's also called the avalanche method. And what that does, the process allows you to make minimum payments on all your credit cards. Okay? And then what you do is you pick the credit card with the highest interest rate and you start paying that off first. Okay, so pay your minimums on all your other credit cards. You focus on the highest interest rate credit card and start paying that highest interest rate first. Once a debt with the highest interest rate is paid off, then that payment goes to the next highest interest rate, and so forth and so on. You continue until your debt is paid off. Now, one important thing I want you to think about is before embarking on the debt avalanche program, or really any of these methods I'm going to go through with you tonight, you really should have enough money in the bank for living expenses and emergencies. All right. Now, this avalanche method takes discipline and commitment as any of these other methods. So I just want you to understand that sometimes it may hurt, but at the end, it's going to feel good when when all your credit card debt is gone. So the next method is called the snowball method. Don't ask me why we're focused on winter, avalanche, and snowball. It's just what they call them. And this does the opposite. What it does is it allows you to make minimum payments on all your accounts, but really focuses on the smallest debt balances first. Once the smallest debt balance is paid off, the monies you're paying is allocated to the next smallest balance. Now, a lot of people tend to like this type of method because what it does in the very beginning, it allows you to get a series of wins and successes in the very beginning of the debt payment process. All right. So it helps build motivation. It helps build confidence to allow you to continue and say, yeah, I'm on my way to getting debt free. Now, every time you pay off an account, you free up more money, put that towards the next largest balance. By the way, this may also be a positive impact on your credit score. So as you develop and as you make some traction, your credit score will also start to increase because that utilization ratio will start going down. Your balances will go down and your credit limit will stay the same. But the snowball method does have some downsides. Typically, you may end up paying more money over time because you tend to leave the highest interest for last. And it can also take a little bit longer in doing that. But when you're going through this process or any of these methods and processes, what I want you to do is I always want you to be aware and always look for lower rate cards or loans that may be available. Okay? And that's what method number 3 talks about. It's paying off debt with balance transfers. So I'm at a 17% rate interest card and I find a 9% rate interest card. I may want to transfer my debt from the 17% down to the 9%. Or better yet, I may find that there are cards out there with 0% interest rates. Now, these interest rates aren't forever. They're really introductory interest rates. But if I apply for a credit card with a 0% interest rate from 17%, that's a pretty good deal. Now, also, if you have your credit card, see if they have some type of lower interest rate card or introductory 0 rate offer. What you do have to understand that these 0 rate interest cards are usually only good for 12 to 18 months. and then they expire and they go up to a higher rate. It could be 18 or 19%. But you really have to understand, and you really have to read the fine print, because the 0% could be on transfers only, but new purchases could be 17 or 19%. Like I said, you really have to understand and know the revolving credit and credit card that you're dealing with. But something that's pretty cool is, an example is, let's say you have $6,000 on a credit card and it's at 18%, and now you transfer that to a 0% credit card and it's for 12 months. So $6,000, 18%, 0% only lasts for 12 months. Pay $500 a month towards that credit card, knock it down, get rid of it in 12 months, and you'll save $600 in interest as well. Not only will you save $600 of interest, but now you're saving the $500 that you're paying on a monthly basis. All right? Also, you could balance transfers, take a look at, consolidate higher interest rate credit cards to lower interest rates, personal loans, or even equity line of credits. So if you have a home and you have some equity built up, equity line of credits are running about, today, in today's age, probably around 3.5% to 4%. Personal loans are 5.5% to 6%. So it might make sense to do a debt consolidation. And what it also does is it takes you away from a revolving credit to installment as well. So, but do your research, take a look at different loan providers regarding rates, check out their fees, make sure their fees aren't too exorbitant, and then try not to get into the habit of, once you do a debt consolidation, try not to get into the habit of maxing out your credit cards again. So I had a situation back in 2007. Young couple bought a house. Homes were increasing at 20 to 40% a year. It was a crazy time. They had about 20,000 of credit card loans. We restructured, refinanced. Rates were dropping. We put everything into their mortgage. We were going to put additional monies to pay down their mortgage a little bit quicker. And we were going to get away from the credit card. 2 months later, after everything was approved, I pull into the driveway. There's a brand new Ford Explorer. Their house is newly furnished. So all the monies that we saved them, they actually spent. And technically, they got into more debt than they were. But they thought things were going really well in the economy and the homes, and they planned on being in a house a few years, and they were going to sell it. 2009 came along. The housing market crashed. The stock market crashed. And unfortunately, they ended up losing everything. So just be aware that these things can happen and do happen. And be smart about how you strategically set up your debt restructuring plan. So with that being said, a lot of times if you do this debt consolidation, you'll not only reduce your payments, it will allow you to pay off your debt quicker, but you just have to be aware that not to rack up your credit again, okay? And like I mentioned to you earlier, now you're going from a revolving credit to an installment credit, and then that changes the whole dynamics of the utilization credit, which in lieu will actually increase your credit score. A couple tips I want to talk to you about. Make sure you do keep the credit cards open and don't use them. And again, this helps your credit utilization. Reduce or stop using credit cards, or if you do use them, make sure it's a reasonable amount that you can pay them off at the end of the month. And one thing to be aware of as well too, know your credit card, like I said earlier. Know this bonus structure, points, how they work. You know, my wife is pretty good at this kind of stuff. That's why during the Christmas time, she will spend everything on our American Express because she knows at the end of the month that she's going to pay it off. But what she wants to do is she wants to accumulate points. She knows what points, what purchases utilizes the highest points. So travel gets you utilizes 1% of your points that you accumulated. So if you have 100,000 points, that's equivalent to $1,000 in travel. Whereas if you purchase something, it might only be 0.5% with those points. So understand the point structure, understand the bonuses and how they work, and use it to your advantage, because let me tell you something. The credit cards are using these high interest rates and zero introductory rates to their advantage as well too, to suck you in. All right? So let's get to method number 5. Method number 5 is a debt settlement program. This is for individuals that are past due on their payments. They're getting behind. They do have the availability and the opportunity for a one-time payoff. But what they have to do is they have to negotiate with the credit card company. So let's say I have $40,000 of credit cards. I'm able to secure a loan from my parents, or maybe even from another source. I've seen somebody do it with a 401k plan. They call up the credit card company and they work out and negotiate a settlement payment. Instead of paying dollar for dollar, they could pay 40 cents at a dollar or 50 cents at a dollar. So with that being said, you could do that on your own, or if you feel better, you could hire a professional debt settlement company and let them do it for you. Now, do your research and be careful, because there are scammers out there that will take your money. So make sure you're dealing with a reputable company. The interesting thing is, the more debt you're in and the more delinquent you are, the better leverage you have to negotiate your payment down from $40,000 maybe to $20,000. Okay? And then the last and final method I'm going to talk to you about is bankruptcy. And this is the last resort. You reach your limit. You're at the place of no return. Bankruptcy can really devastate your credit. But if you think your debt is insurmountable and your bankruptcy is the only way out, I would research some local attorneys, make sure they specialize in bankruptcy, and have a conversation with the attorney. Now, there are 2 different types of bankruptcies. There's a Chapter 13. This allows you to keep your properties. The courts will structure a payment and renegotiate all your debt down, and usually to a 3 to 4 year time frame. There's also something called Chapter 7. Oftentimes this requires you to surrender your property, most likely your real estate, your home, whatever the case might be. The courts will negotiate, and your repayment is usually like 3 to 4 years, but you can lose your house. But again, this process can be long and expensive due to attorney fees and court fees and everything else. And by the way, before you file for bankruptcies, the Department of Justice will make you seek credit counseling that's approved by them, that you have to go and get counseled to make sure that you understand what it means to go bankrupt and all the ramifications behind bankruptcy. Bankruptcy usually does stick with you for life. If you fill out applications, you'll know sometimes it says, have you ever declared bankruptcy? So something to be aware of. But if you go bankrupt, it can take 12 to 18 months to start improving your credit your credit scores. So there is a light at the end of the tunnel, but you do have to work at it, obviously. I do have one other thing. I'm going to have Denise send everybody this debt reduction worksheet. What it allows you to do is it allows you to itemize and list all your debt, your payments, and then it will allow you to kind of figure out, hey, is the avalanche method the best for me, or is a snowball method a cooler option? No pun intended. So anyway, with that being said, that is the end of my presentation. If anybody has any questions, they could email me. If anybody would like to talk about some different options available, email me, let me know. We are going to be taking the month of August off. And we will resume back in September. So keep your eyes open, and I hope everybody has a great end of the summer. And September we will resume, and I have some really good topics coming up for the fall time. Have a good night. Thanks for attending again.